Hello and welcome. You're watching Gravitas. I'm Molly Kampir. Let's get started. Our top story tonight comes from the United Kingdom. It is in a state of mourning. Queen Elizabeth II passed away at the age of 96, the longest-serving monarch in British history. King Charles has taken over, but this is not a smooth transition. The start of this new chapter has raised some old issues that are now translating into protests on the ground. Anti-monarchy protests in the UK have been making headlines and there have been arrests. On Gravitas tonight, we focus on a question that finds itself at the center stage once again. Is the monarchy still relevant? And beyond that, what about the Commonwealth of Nations? Queen Elizabeth II's dream project. What purpose does it serve today? Since last week, the world has been mourning the death of Queen Elizabeth II. It is a time to reflect on her life of service, but some are also trying to draw attention to the sins of the empire and question the relevance of the monarchy. Is the British police willing to tolerate dissent against the royals? There are doubts. Tonight, I have some pictures to show you. This is from central London. A local British newspaper put out this video. There is a man surrounded by the police. He is holding up a poster. It says, "Not my king." Safe to assume that message is for King Charles. That man was protesting peacefully, but the police decided to remove him from the area.
Everyone supporting Queen.
This was not a one-off case. I have more videos to show you. Look at this. A lawyer was at the Parliament Square in London. He was holding a blank piece of paper. A blank piece of paper. So technically, it was not even a protest sign. But the local police had problems with that too. They approached this lawyer. Listen in to the exchange that followed.
I'm not going to give you details.
I'm not going to. Why would you ask for my details?
Just so I can check and make sure you can be here.
I'm in my city.
You've already said you've been arrested once.
Sorry?
You've already told me you've been arrested.
No, I haven't.
No.
I said other people have been arrested.
Okay. Well, now we've made that clear. I want to make sure you didn't have bail conditions not to be. You said you're going to write stuff on it that may offend people.
I said I was going to write "Not my king" on a sign, and you asked for my details.
It may offend someone.
Who's that going to offend?
Don't know. Someone may.
Not my king. Someone might be offended.
What was that all about? Was the London police trying to stop a protest before it started? Was that an attempt to crush dissent against the new king? The lawyer who had that exchange later tweeted. His name is Paul Paulusland. Let me tell you what he said. A period of quiet mourning for the Queen is fine, but using that period to cement Charles' accession as king and cracking down on any dissent to the accession as disrespectful is outrageous. Indeed, it is outrageous because these are not isolated incidents. They fit a pattern. Look at what happened in Edinburgh. The royal procession was passing through a street. A man was arrested. What for? For criticizing Prince Andrew. The man pulled away from the crowd violently. Take a look.
Disgusting! Wait, I've done nothing wrong.
This protester was later arrested. What are the charges? Breach of peace. According to the Scotland police, this is a form of disorderly conduct. And this was not the only arrest. Over the weekend, a 22-year-old woman was arrested in Edinburgh. She is facing criminal charges for her protest. She will have to appear in court. Yes, a protester was slapped with criminal charges for protesting against the monarchy. There was an arrest in Oxford as well. A man was charged for criticizing King Charles. He was walking past an event where Charles was proclaimed the new king. He shouted just 3 words. Who elected him? That simple question led to the man's arrest. The man later wrote about his ordeal online. Let me quote from what he wrote. I doubt most of the people in the crowd even heard me. 2 or 3 people near me told me to shut up. I did not insult them or attack them personally, but responded by saying that a head of state was being imposed on us without our consent. A security guard appeared, stood right in front of me and told me to be quiet. 2 more security guards came along and they tried to push me backwards. As I asked them to give the legal basis for what they were doing, the police came over, more or less moved the security guards out of the way and took hold of me, unquote. Should people be arrested for criticizing the monarchy? The United Kingdom is a constitutional monarchy, but it is also a democracy. These arrests have now boomeranged. The protests against the monarchy are intensifying. Online, a hashtag is now gaining traction. Hashtag not my king. Civil liberties campaigners are expressing alarm. Even lawmakers are concerned. A Labour MP, in fact, spoke out. Zara Sultana represents the Coventry South constituency in the British Parliament. Here is what she had to say about the arrests. I'm quoting, "No one should be arrested for just expressing Republican views. Extraordinary and shocking. This needs saying." The London police tried to repair the damage today. They released a statement. It said, the public absolutely have a right to protest. But these assurances are not good enough. Anti-monarchy groups are now mobilizing. They are planning more protests, especially during the coronation of King Charles. It is expected to happen within a year. So barely a few days into the job, King Charles is facing one of his biggest challenges, the declining popularity of the royals and the shrinking relevance of monarchies. People are asking if the royals are still relevant. And it's not just the British citizens who have doubts. You know what they say, the Queen is dead, long live the King. Meaning, while the monarch has died, the monarchy must live on. But the question is, will it? You saw what is happening in the United Kingdom. Let's now zoom out. Let's look at what's happening elsewhere. Like most of you already know, the British monarch is also the head of state for 15 countries. Which countries am I talking about? Antigua and Barbuda, Australia, the Bahamas, Belize, Canada, Grenada, Jamaica, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Solomon Islands and Tuvalu. Queen Elizabeth II's face adorns the banknotes in many of these countries, and now that will obviously change. Will there also be a wider change? Will countries think about removing King Charles III as their head of state? Will they bring about a constitutional change, now that the longest ruling British monarch is no more? I ask this because of recent history, the kind of history that the Crown dislikes. In 2020, Barbados dropped Queen Elizabeth II from constitutional roles. Today, the British monarch is no longer the head of state for Barbados. Guyana also dumped the British monarchy in 1970, Trinidad and Tobago in 1976, Dominica in 1978, and Mauritius in 1992. The Crown obviously was not flattered. But the trend is not surprising, and let me tell you why. Number one, sovereignty. Most countries today are not okay with the idea of foreign interference. Yes, the British monarch is only a symbolic head of state, but isn't that all the more reason why countries can afford to totally let go of this constitutional role? Why not have a head of state who is a member of the same state? Why be led by a foreign king? Number two, dark history. A British king sitting as a head of state in Jamaica is only a reminder of the country's colonial past, of slavery, of exploitation. Again, it is a reminder countries can do without. Tell me one thing, do countries today really need a colonial hangover? I'm not making a case against British monarchy. I'm only asking obvious questions that I'm sure people across these 15 countries are also asking. Look at what's happening in Australia. The leader of Australia's Green Party recently tweeted his condolence message for the Queen. But in the same message, he said, and I'm quoting, "Now Australia must move forward. We need treaty with First Nations people and we need to become a republic." And this is not really a fringe point of view. Australia is already laying the foundation for a referendum. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says a nationwide vote will not be held during his first term. His term ends in 2025, which means come 2025, Australia could be looking at a vote against the monarchy. New Zealand also is looking at dumping the monarchy sooner rather than later. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern was once asked about the possibility of a referendum. She said, and I quote, "I believe it is likely to occur in my lifetime." Here's a headline from Antigua and Barbuda. Right after Charles III ascended to the throne, this Caribbean island said it will hold a referendum to remove the British monarch as Antigua and Barbuda's head of state. The country's Prime Minister, Gaston Brown, said, I'm quoting, "It does not represent any form of disrespect to the monarch. This is not an act of hostility or any difference between Antigua and Barbuda and the monarchy. It is a final step to complete the circle of independence to become a truly sovereign nation." Jamaica is also looking at a referendum before 2025. So you get the point I'm trying to make. People in the UK are not the only ones looking to move past the monarchy. So where does this leave the Commonwealth? It is a grouping of 56 countries. The Commonwealth represents 2.2 billion people around the world. It includes countries like South Africa, Seychelles, India, Malaysia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Malta, Fiji, Australia, Tonga. Like I said, all in all, there are 56 countries, and most of them were once a part of the British Empire. In other words, they were British colonies. The British monarchy is the head of the Commonwealth. This group reminds the Crown of the times when the sun never set on the British monarchy. Those were glorious years for the monarchy. But times have changed. What purpose is the Commonwealth serving today? It is not a political association like the Quad, AUKUS or the SCO. It is not a trade alliance either. The countries are too far from one another to trade or have shared issues. So coming back to the question, what is the relevance of the Commonwealth today? It wouldn't be wrong to call this group Queen Elizabeth II's dream project. Ever since she turned 21, she pledged to commit her life to the welfare of the Commonwealth. The late Queen barely missed any heads of government meetings. So in many ways, the Commonwealth stuck together because of the Queen. But with the crown now having been passed to King Charles III, will this group also dump the British monarchy? Like the protesters in the UK, will members of the Commonwealth also urge each other to move on? We will be tracking this story closely for you. Let's now shift focus to Pakistan. It has just lost the Asia Cup and remains in a state of shock. Pakistani players are in introspection mode. They are trying to understand why they were defeated. Pakistani politicians, meanwhile, have replaced them on TVs. They are throwing political googlies to keep the people entertained. Case in point being this statement from Imran Khan, Pakistan's former Prime Minister. In a recent television interview, he hinted at letting the current army chief continue his tenure. The same army chief who is said to be the reason behind Imran Khan's removal from the Prime Minister's office. Why? Our next report tells you.
Meet Qamar Javed Bajwa, Pakistan's 10th Chief of Army Staff, the most powerful man in the country. But in November this year, Bajwa is set to retire. His tenure is ending, and he has no plans of serving another. Both the Pakistan Army and Bajwa himself have denied all reports of an extension, a decision that has upset Imran Khan. In a recent interview, Pakistan's former Prime Minister suggested that Bajwa should remain the army chief until the next general election. Why? Because apparently the country's political atmosphere demands this. We're not saying this, Imran Khan is.
देखिए मैंने इसके ऊपर कोई तफसील में नहीं सोचा. मैंने तो एक पॉइंट सिर्फ ये कहा था,
प्राइम मिनिस्टर इन वेटिंग है, आपको इन चीजों का तो हमें देना है ना जवाब.
इसका वकील क्या कहते हैं, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल एक्सपर्ट्स क्या कहते हैं, मैं नहीं जानता. लेकिन मैं सिर्फ आपको ये कह रहा हूं कि मुल्क एक्स्ट्रॉर्डिनरी सर्कमस्टांसेस का सामना कर रहा है. मुल्क के हालात जिस तरह कहता है और कंपाउंड हो गए हैं ये सैलाब से. इस दौर में हमें ये सोचना चाहिए कि हमने अब मुल्क को इस दलदल से निकालने के लिए क्या फैसला
सर बात करेंगे ना इससे आप.
What you just heard was Imran Khan suggesting that the army chief should remain in office. The same army chief he denigrated and called names. The same army chief who's said to be the reason behind his removal from office. The question is, what explains this U-turn? The answer is politics. You see, Bajwa has been the most influential army chief in recent times. He is popular both at home and abroad. So much so that he even got a 3-year extension from the Imran Khan government. But now a new party is in power. One that has a checkered history with the Pakistan Army. A history of coups and irreconcilable differences. So what Imran Khan is essentially trying to do is sow seeds of discord between the government and the army. Just look at the recent developments. 7 days ago, he said that the Shehbaz Sharif government wants to appoint a favorable army chief, a loyalist who they could control.
और ये दोनों जरदारी और नवाज शरीफ इनकी पूरी कोशिश है कि ऐसा आर्मी चीफ आए जो ये अपना कोई फेवरेट लेके आए. ये अपना आर्मी चीफ लाना चाहते हैं क्योंकि पैसा इन्होंने चोरी किया हुआ है. ये डरते हैं कि यहां कोई तकड़ा आर्मी चीफ आ गया, एक मुहिब्बे वतन आर्मी चीफ आ गया तो वो पूछेगा इनसे। तो इस डर से ये बैठे हुए हैं कि ये दोनों मिलकर अपना आर्मी चीफ अपॉइंट करेंगे। किसी सूरत इस मुल्क की तकदीर इनके हाथ में नहीं होनी चाहिए। इस मुल्क का आर्मी चीफ मेरिट के ऊपर होना चाहिए। जो सबसे मेरिट पे है उसको आर्मी चीफ बनना चाहिए। किसी की पसंदीदा आर्मी चीफ नहीं होना चाहिए, किसी का फेवरेट नहीं होना चाहिए।
7 days on, Imran Khan is advocating for Bajwa's term renewal. The intention is clear. He wants to pit the current dispensation against the army by using the excuse of political instability. What's in it for him? Perhaps a chance to reclaim the Prime Minister's seat. It's an open secret that the Pakistan army installs leaders into office. Imran Khan was the army's blue-eyed boy. But his interference in the army's affairs led to his fall from grace and office. So by pushing for an extension for Bajwa, he could be trying to regain the lost trust and orchestrate divisions between politicians in Islamabad and the generals in Rawalpindi. As for Shehbaz Sharif, this stunt puts him in a tough spot. He can neither openly refuse to give another term to Bajwa, nor can he openly bat for the appointment of a new army chief. All eyes are now on General Bajwa's next move. If he does decide to seek yet another tenure, it will be interesting to see if Shehbaz Sharif complies. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Ukraine's counter-offensive is gathering momentum. First, they claim to have retaken 3,000 square kilometers. Now, almost 6,000 square kilometers. Just to put that in perspective, that's around the size of America's Delaware state. Now, right at the beginning, let me say this, we cannot verify this claim by Ukraine. Their president did not offer any proof while making it. Listen in.
Since the first days of September and until today, our warriors have liberated more than 6,000 square kilometers of the territory of Ukraine in the south and in the east. The advances of our forces continue.
6,000 square kilometers is debatable, but here's what we can say. Ukraine is certainly making some military progress. Have a look at these pictures. They are from the city of Vovchansk in the northeast. Ukrainian soldiers were seen ripping out Russian banners from supermarkets. They also burnt Russian flags. So there is no denying that Ukraine is making progress. The question is how much progress? The US says Russia has ceded most of its gains. Russian soldiers are now crossing back into their country, which raises the question, how exactly did Ukraine pull this off? According to Russian officials, it was all about the numbers. Ukraine had 8 times more soldiers.
But speaking about the manpower that has been amassed there for the Ukrainian army's counter-defense, it outnumbered our forces approximately by 8 times, not less. Therefore, I think Russian command decided to retreat and regroup in order to preserve our personnel.
But this battle is very much on. Since the soldiers are retreating, Russia has changed its strategy. They are carrying out airstrikes on Kharkiv. Take a look at this power substation. It was damaged by a Russian missile strike soon after the city's public infrastructure lost power, including the underground trains. Another strike hit the police headquarters. At least one person was killed in the attack. Videos showed firefighters struggling to control the blaze. So Russia has opted for a classic military strategy. They are outnumbered on the ground, so they have opted for aerial attacks, strategic aerial attacks. Ukraine believes Russia is trying to cut off power and water supplies to Kharkiv, basically squeeze the counter-attack. What does this say about the Russian military? Well, it depends on who you ask. Western intelligence is calling it an absolute failure. They say Russian soldiers are abandoning their position and weapons. But Russia denies this. They are calling it a regrouping effort. You see, Moscow is now focused on eastern Ukraine, basically the Donbas region. So they say this is not a retreat, this is a recalibration. And perhaps it is. But it still exposes the weakness of Russia's military. Just think about it. If you cannot fight a two-front battle, how can you call yourself a superpower? On paper, Russia is way more powerful than Ukraine. They have more jets, more tanks, more missiles, yet they had to retreat from Kharkiv. And this will be a huge morale booster for Ukraine. But will it translate into bigger strategic gains? That depends on the West. You see, Ukraine's counterattack is not a random military operation. It was planned to send out a message, not just to Russia, but also to the West. Let me explain this. For 200 days, Russia dictated this war. The pace, the area of operation, everything was determined by Russia. Ukraine was merely responding to Putin's strategies. But this counterattack is different. It shows that Ukraine is capable of taking the fight to Russia, that Ukraine can beat Russia with the right equipment. And that is where the West comes in. This counterattack was made possible by Western weapons, especially the HIMARS missile system. So naturally, Ukraine wants more. They want to show the West that the weapons are making a difference, that this war is not a lost cause. Same with political support. Most of Europe is bracing for a very tough winter. Russia has already cut gas supplies via the Nord Stream pipeline. So support for Ukraine could be waning. European leaders could be forced to roll back some of the sanctions. So what does Ukraine do? They begin this counterattack. They show evidence of their military capabilities. Now the ball is in the West's court. They can either scale up military assistance or they can continue at the same rate. Right now, the West is looking for evidence. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says it's too early to take a call.
It is too early to tell exactly where this is going. The Russians maintain very significant forces in Ukraine, as well as equipment and arms and munitions. They continue to use it indiscriminately against not just the Ukrainian armed forces, but civilians and civilian infrastructure, as we've seen. The brutalization of the country continues by the Russian aggressor. There is, I think, unfortunately, the prospect that this continues to go on. But I think it's encouraging to see the progress that Ukraine has made.
Encouraging, but we would like to see more. That's the message from America. And as for Russia, they must re-evaluate their goals. Yes, they are focusing on Donbas, but this sort of a retreat can hurt military morale, and that is crucial for invading powers. After all, Russians are fighting for politics, Ukrainians are fighting to free their homeland. Russia is in the news for another reason. Mysterious deaths of senior level executives and oligarchs. The Russian press reported the death of another influential businessman. How did he die? Apparently, he fell off a speeding boat near Vladivostok. Reports say this is the 9th executive who passed away this year. Are these mysterious deaths connected? Our next report tries to find the answers.
Ivan Pechorin was a man of influence. He was the managing director of Russia's Far East and Arctic Development Corporation. Just a few days ago, he was spotted at the Eastern Economic Forum, an event where Russian President Vladimir Putin delivered the keynote address. Now Pechorin's body has been recovered from the high seas. According to the Russian press, he fell off a boat. In February, Pechorin's farm had announced the death of another colleague, Igor Nosov. He was a general director. The cause of his death? A stroke at the age of just 43 years. something doesn't add up. Are the deaths of Pechorin and Nosov a coincidence? Or is there more than what meets the eye? There is reason to be suspicious because since late January, Russia has witnessed the death of several prominent businessmen. At least 5 of them apparently committed suicide. 3 other executives killed members of their own family before taking their own lives. At least 4 officials were linked to Russian energy giant Gazprom or one of the subsidiaries. One of the most prominent names on this list is Ravil Maganov. He was the chairman of the Russian oil company Lukoil. Maganov allegedly fell out of the window of a hospital in Moscow. Lukoil lost another top official this year, Alexander Sabotin. He was found dead near Moscow in May. The cause of his death? An unexplained heart attack. Throughout this year, similar reports of mysterious deaths have trickled in. But no case was as murky as this one. Sergei Protesenya was a quintessential Russian oligarch. His wealth was well over $400 million. He made that money while working for Russian giant Novatek. In April, he was found dead inside a rented villa in Spain. Protesenya was found hanging from the belt of his own bathrobe in the garden. Spanish police also found the bodies of his wife and daughter. They had axe and knife wounds. Spanish police believed this was an isolated case of domestic violence. But Protasenya's son refuses to believe that. In an interview, he said his father is not a killer. Top-level executives, a string of unexplained deaths, an unavoidable connection to Russia's energy industry. Several international investigators are curious. They say these deaths are not natural. They could be staged suicides or assassinations, perhaps even a fallout of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Were these businessmen punished for opposing the war? The mystery may not be solved anytime soon. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
"2022 has been crucial for relations between India and Sri Lanka, sort of like a new chapter. Throughout the last decade, Colombo inched closer to Beijing, but the Sri Lankan economic crisis was a reality check. So the new leadership has realized the importance of India. Like I said, a fresh chapter. But even with new beginnings, some things never change. Some priorities. And for India, Sri Lankan Tamils are one such priority. They are the largest minority group in Sri Lanka. They live in the northern part of the island. Historically, this community has been marginalized, even brutalized during the civil war. So India has consistently called for a fair reconciliation process to give the Tamils justice, equality, and opportunities. On Monday, India reiterated that demand. New Delhi called out Sri Lanka's government at the UN Human Rights Council. I have that statement with me. I'm quoting. "The Indian delegation notes with concern the lack of measurable progress by the government of Sri Lanka on their commitments of a political solution to the ethnic issue." That is a public rebuke by India. The question is why? New Delhi is looking for a reset in ties. Why criticize Sri Lanka? For starters, because it is standard policy. Indian Tamils have always been concerned for their brethren in Sri Lanka. Many Tamil political parties have also taken up the issue, and as a result, India supports the Tamil cause. Having said that, this policy has often lacked consistency. Every time the UN votes on Tamil reconciliation, India has a different response. In 2012 and 2013, India voted in favor. In 2014, India abstained. And last year, in 2021, India abstained again. Interestingly, China and Pakistan voted against that resolution. So what explains this lack of consistency? A lot of factors, like the pressure from Tamil political parties. If they are part of the ruling coalition, there is more pressure, and if not, the government has more strategic leeway. But in this case, it's not about Tamil pressure, it's about strategic considerations. Put in one word, leverage. Last month, Sri Lanka permitted a Chinese research vessel to dock in Hambantota. India objected to it. They asked Sri Lanka to cancel the voyage, but in the end, China prevailed. The research vessel did dock in Hambantota. It led to a war of words between India and the other side. Weeks later, this happens. India calls out Sri Lanka at the UN Human Rights Council. Like we keep saying, there are no coincidences in geopolitics. Every statement, every gesture is calculated and planned. So you could say this statement was a subtle reminder, not just of Tamil reconciliation, but also of Colombo's dependence on China. Let me go back to India's statement. The current crisis in Sri Lanka has demonstrated the limitations of debt-driven economy and the impact it has on standard of living. Technically, this statement is out of place. Debt is not directly related to Tamil reconciliation. So why did India talk about it? Because it's a reminder to the Sri Lankan government. Chinese loans landed them in this mess, whereas India extended assistance worth $3.8 billion. So this statement is a not so subtle nudge. The question is, what happens next? The Rights Council is expected to hold a vote in early October. By then, India will have to make up its mind. Another abstention or a vote in favor of the resolution. Which way will India go? A lot depends on how Sri Lanka's new government performs. The UN is expected to publish a report on the reconciliation process, and chances are it will be critical of the government. But Colombo has preemptively rejected it. Listen in.
Anything external mechanisms, we are not agreeable because our constitution doesn't allow that. The Sri Lankan constitution is very clear on that any judicial process should be in terms of the Sri Lankan constitution. So within the Sri Lankan domestic mechanism, we agree, but anything externally try to pressurize and take the power away from the constitution, we will not agree to that.
You know what they say about solving problems? The first step is acceptance. In 2015, now President Ranil Wickremesinghe had a different position. He supported a joint investigation into war crimes, but now the government has different ideas. So unless there is real reconciliation, India will keep up the pressure. Another factor is China. Wickremesinghe caved in to Chinese pressure last month. He permitted the research vessel to dock in Hambantota. India will be watching out for such moves in the future. If Colombo cozies up to China, India could play hardball, including on issues linked to the Tamils. In fact, India's ties with its immediate neighbors will remain in focus this week. The annual summit of the SCO, that is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, is happening this week. Uzbekistan is the host. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is attending. India's presence at this summit holds great importance. That's because India will assume the presidency of the SCO. New Delhi has a unique opportunity. India will hold the SCO presidency for a year until September 2023. That means India will host next year's SCO summit, an event that will be attended by leaders of countries like China, Pakistan and Russia. So in the coming months, India is in a position to set the agenda for SCO. What are the issues that New Delhi could focus on? There are two issues of immediate concern for India. Number one, sovereignty and territorial integrity. And number two, terrorism. Let's break them down for you one by one. Issue number one, sovereignty and territorial integrity. This is an obvious one. Pakistan and China are permanent members of the SCO, and India is engaged in a territorial dispute with both of these neighbors. With Pakistan, India's position is clear and well defined. Terrorism and talks cannot go together, and Pakistan needs to end its backing to terror groups. With China, recent events could dictate India's approach. Recently, India and China decided to disengage from a key flashpoint, the Gogra Hot Springs area. Reports say the disengagement process has been completed, but there is still a long way to go. Indian and Chinese troops remain deployed at two friction points, Demchok and Depsang. China is yet to commit to a full de-escalation, and there is speculation that Prime Minister Modi could meet Chinese President Xi Jinping. There is no official confirmation yet, but the disengagement in eastern Ladakh has certainly paved the way for Prime Minister Modi's participation at the summit. So what is the way forward? Perhaps we can get some clues from the 2020 summit. It was a virtual summit. Prime Minister Modi had delivered a speech. It had a message for China.
भारत का मानना है कि कनेक्टिविटी को और अधिक गहरा करने के लिए यह आवश्यक है कि एक दूसरे की संप्रभुता और टेरिटोरियल इंटीग्रिटी के सम्मान के मूल सिद्धांतों के साथ आगे बढ़ा जाए.
Respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Deeper economic cooperation within the SCO is only possible when the sovereignty of its members is respected. India is unlikely to budge from this position. New Delhi is also expected to take a tough stand against terrorism, and that is the other major issue, the growing terror threat within the region. India has been concerned about the situation in Afghanistan. The rise of the Taliban increased India's security challenges. This is an issue that India has raised at the United Nations as well. New Delhi has been concerned that Afghanistan is becoming a terrorist safe haven, and Pakistan-based anti-India groups could get support from the Taliban regime. Here is a statement from June this year. This is what India had told the UN Security Council. The linkages between groups listed as terrorist organizations by the United Nations Security Council, such as the Lashkar-e-Toiba and the Jaish-e-Mohammed, as well as provocative statements made by other terrorist groups operating out of Afghanistan, pose a direct threat to the region. A direct threat to the region. That is India's assessment. The SCO summit is the perfect platform to raise the issue of Afghanistan again, because it is perhaps the only grouping that represents the region. Look at this map. Afghanistan is at the center of the region that SCO represents. It is a direct neighbor of 4 SCO members: China, Pakistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. It has close historical and economic ties with 4 more permanent members: Russia, India, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. All these members have a stake in stabilizing Afghanistan, but so far the SCO has failed to lead the charge. India's presidency could change that. Not only does New Delhi have a chance to raise its security concerns, it can also dictate the direction of the ongoing efforts. The SCO summit begins on Thursday, and we will be tracking all the updates for you. Our next story is about Brahmastra, a movie that has been in the news right from its inception. Made on a colossal budget of $51 million, this film was expected to be India's answer to Marvel. But despite its huge star appeal and impressive VFX, Brahmastra has not quite lived up to the expectations of some cinema goers. And why is that? Our next report explores.
It was supposed to be India's answer to Hollywood.
प्राचीन काल से हमारे बीच
a movie that takes inspiration from the globally successful Marvel Cinematic Universe. But besides being a visual spectacle, has Brahmastra justified the scale of its ambition? Has it lived up to all the hype? And has India's Marvel dream come true? These are questions worth pondering over. For starters, because we're talking about the costliest Hindi film ever. Brahmastra is made on a colossal budget of 410 crore, or $51 million. Has it failed to bring the requisite adrenaline rush? We're not asking this, the audience is. Many viewers say Brahmastra didn't offer a wholesome experience. Some are even taking hilarious jibes at the movie. In this viral meme, Twitter users are mocking the female lead for having just one dialogue. Others are drawing comparisons with another movie scene. And yet some others are enacting the characters' scenes themselves.
Shiva! Shiva! Shiva, तुम ठीक हो? Shiva! तू झूठ क्यों बोला, Shiva?
Some are impressed with the VFX, but are trolling the movie's screenplay. Some aren't even impressed with the VFX. They're mocking the producer for spending too much. Some are trolling the movie for its dramatic dialogues. Others are criticizing it for copying way too much from Marvel. Like these scenes where the characters resemble Wanda, Aquaman, and Thor. The internet is flooded with such memes, and questions have been raised over whether this is another case of untapped possibilities. Look at India's previous Brahmastra-like attempts. Krish, Drona, Ra-1, the flying jet. India has its fair share of superheroes. Also, its share of visual effects wonders. Like Bahubali and RRR. Does no movie in this long list really match up to a Marvel film? Like Brahmastra's ending, this question too does not have a sure answer. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
It was not too long ago that we spoke about moonlighting, the practice of having a second job. Last time, we told you that companies must disclose their moonlighting policy, tell employees where they draw the hard line. 2 Indian companies have now disclosed their moonlighting policies, and I am afraid it's not good news. Indian IT giant Infosys says moonlighting can lead to termination. In other words, if an employee works elsewhere post-work hours, he or she could be sacked. Tech giant Wipro's thoughts on moonlighting have been made clear through a tweet. It's from Wipro's chairman Rishabh Premji, and he brands moonlighting as plain and simple cheating. So what is this taboo around moonlighting all about? Just so that people understand the concept better, let's once again tell you the definition of moonlighting. It is the practice of taking up a second job after work hours. Now, 2 things you must note at this point. 1, we are talking about a second job, not a primary job. And 2, we are talking about a job that's done post-work hours and during work hours. So you could safely say moonlighting is the paid work that you do during your free time, or what people call me time. Basically, time that's beyond your employer's jurisdiction. So can employers really forbid you from moonlighting? Historically, employees have often been moonlighting. School teachers have provided tuitions to students. Executives moonlight as consultants. People have been moonlighting for ages. So why has it suddenly become a problem? Recently, an employee was found to be working 7 jobs. HRs tracked multiple Provident accounts linked to this employee. He was a techie, an Indian techie, working in India's very own Silicon Valley, Bengaluru, and the news spread like wildfire. It triggered a debate. The question was simple: should employees be allowed to moonlight? The answer should have been simple as well. You know, why not? As long as an employee is transparent about it. As long as there is no conflict of interest. As long as he or she is not compromising on her primary job or showing up to work drained and exhausted. Because come to think of it, what is wrong with moonlighting? People have varied interests. People also have financial goals. And moonlighting helps both. So giving it a green signal only seemed fair. But it seems like all is not fair in India's job sector. Moonlighting is being weighed on moral scales. It is being called cheating, even two-timing. Moonlighting is being forbidden. The email sent to Infosys employees came with the subject line that read, "No two-timing, no moonlighting." What did the rest of that email say? Let me read it out to you. At Infosys, dual employment is not permitted as per the employee handbook and the code of conduct. As clearly stated in your offer letter, you agree not to take employment, whether full-time or part-time, as director, partner, member, employee of any other organization, entity, engaged in any form of business activity without the consent of Infosys. The consent may be given subject to any terms and conditions that the company may think fit and may be withdrawn at any time at the discretion of the company. What does the Indian law say about moonlighting? There is no specific law prohibiting moonlighting in India. The most important document in this context is actually your job contract. Its terms and conditions decide whether or not you can actually moonlight. There are two clauses that you should watch out for. The first one is a single employment clause. Your work contract may legally bind you to a single job. And the second one is the non-competing clause. And this is where the employers are exercising their power, stopping employees from moonlighting. It's like blocking an employee's pursuit of happiness, her pursuit of excellence, of learning new skills, of achieving more. If the pandemic has taught us one thing about us, it is this: a person's job is just a part of his or her life, not her life in itself. In the era of flexible working, can tech giants really afford to ban moonlighting? We understand where their concern is stemming from, and mostly it's to do with conflict of interest and breach of confidential information. But what if a given case involves neither? What if your software engineer is moonlighting as a DJ and he is disclosing it? What if your human resource manager is moonlighting as a yoga instructor and he or she is transparent about it? Should you then be stopping her? And this is where Infosys says the consent may be given subject to any terms and conditions that the company may think fit. But the next part of the sentence hammers the spirit. It says consent may be withdrawn at any time at the discretion of the company. But what grounds are we talking about? 2 weeks ago, when we said companies need to disclose their moonlighting policies, it was so that employees get some clarity, so that they know what they can and cannot do. But grey area helps no one. Employees who want to moonlight will moonlight anyway, and they will be doing it secretively, which actually does an employer more harm than good. Also, what if a rival company is allowing moonlighting? Wouldn't employers then be losing talent? So is a ban on moonlighting really desirable or sustainable? Here's one thing employers must understand. An employee has 24 hours in a day. Her work contract demands that she spends about 9 hours at work. So that is 24 minus 9. What she does in the remaining 15 hours of time should not be anyone's business. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas, leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching.
All right, guys, would you like